Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be starting a conversation with certain individuals in our community as we talk about ministering with under those with addictions and those who are going through the recovery process. So this is going to be a very raw conversation, very transparent, and for those who might be sensitive, this might be for older ears, but still it is a very important discussion to have in our community as we bridge the gap between those who need to enter recovery and those who are in the midst of recovery. How can the church, local church, not just big organizations, but the local church, what can we do? And so I hope that you find these conversations that we have something that is going to be very enlightening and very encouraging for you, and that you get to hear these amazing testimonies as we interview and talk with other individuals. So again, thank you so much for joining us as we go through these raw conversations in recovery, and hope you are blessed by this. Thank you so much.
All right. Wow. Fun mug. I saw that Jesus. It's like I always picture that little finger coming out, so we're starting this conversation talking about recovery and what, learning more about people's stories, but then the connection, like what role can the church play in this? When we were finished our little planning discussion we had a couple of days ago, one of the things that I was thinking about was Teen Challenge and these other big ministries and organizations that help start the recovery process. And those are great and those are wonderful, but I like what you had pointed out, just the importance of the local church. Because that's one of those things where what can we do on the rural level, the more local, boots on the ground, grassroots kind of thing is what I was thinking about with that initial discussion. Because on the one hand, we can't do what those kind of recovery organizations what they can do, but then there's also another part that we as the local church and the local community can do that they can't.
Right.
And so I like how you said building that bridge and figuring out what role can we do in this, and starting that peeling back the layer, peeling back the veil, and actually looking at it at all that it entails.
Right.
But also doing something about it. So so that was kind of an interesting.
Well, I think that that in order for us to really get to a point where we can help the addict,
Mm-hmm.
that we have to first understand what addiction is, and kind of where that person is at.
Right.
And I have a unique perspective because I am an addict.
Right.
And so my biggest thing about this whole conversation was that I don't like the idea that in order for us to help an addict, that they have to go to jail.
Right.
Or they have to be in some sort of trouble. I wish there was, my hope, I should say, is that we can get a bridge from the community to the addict where we can, my goal would be that we could stop them from having to go through hell, in my mind, and I think the only way that we can do that, not that, everything I think is right, but I think the only way that we can do that is to actually have a real honest conversation about what addiction is.
Right.
And your perspective comes from as a pastor.
Yep.
And for me, like I told you before, the turning point for me was when I really started to explore the spiritual side of my own life.
Right.
And that turned everything around in my recovery, because suddenly I understood what recovery was about. Because in addiction, you are you're lost, but you lose that spiritual connection. You lose the, God is not in your. I mean, He's probably in your life, but
Right.
but you're not seeing it, you're not feeling it, and you're not participating in it because you're stuck. Your God at that point is, when can I get that next high?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that to me, that spiritual part is so important, and how can we get the community to that person in a spiritual way, I guess.
'cause
I'm not sure how to explain that.
Yeah, no, and that's a really great way to go, because right now my mind is going in this direction. I'm thinking of on the one hand, that's the idea of needing that greater help. You can't defeat this beast on your own, and so you need help. And on some programs, like, here's your accountability partner, or here's this element, and like what you said, reigniting that spiritual connection.
Right.
In this case, Jesus Christ, and having that help that He brings. And then when you mention that, my mind goes to just the wonderful grace that Christ extends to people. We sometimes, I think, if we, for certain individuals who have spent the majority of their adult life in the church, they view grace as simply just salvation, and that you need to be perfect, when really it's a journey, it's a process. We're growing, which means for many people who are starting that grace journey, that spiritual journey, it means mess, and it doesn't look clean, it doesn't look sanitary, and it means getting your hands dirty. But that's where grace begins, in that messy place.
See, and I think there's a disconnect between the church and someone who is in addiction or is just beginning in recovery,
Right.
Because they have a tendency, like I thought of. So when it was like, like my mother would ask me,
Yeah.
"Hey, you want to go to church?" No, I sure don't.
Right.
And part of it was I was angry, because why would God allow this in my life?
Right.
But of course, later on in the road, I realized that wasn't the situation necessarily. But there's also that whole idea of, okay, well, they're going to judge me. They're going to see things this way. They're, like you said, that we have to be perfect. Well, guess what? As an addict, first getting in recovery, I was a mess.
Right. Well, and that's where you need that starting point.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things too, where whether it's our pride and our flesh saying, I don't want to be judged, or maybe it's even, well, if we can take the liberty and kind of talking like addiction as its own person, if we can,
It
kind of is. Yeah. But even looking at it that way, and be like, even if addiction is lying to you and saying, this is, you don't want to go here.
Right.
And so you have your flesh side saying, man, I don't want to deal with this. You get the addiction saying, nah, you don't need this. They're gonna do whatever. And so it makes complete sense that regaining that spiritual connection, especially in that, you said, that disconnect with the church, is because you have these preconceived ideas, and these third party inner voices saying, hey, no, let's not do that. And so you have that occurring at the same time, and sometimes that disconnect, I think, is not so much it's this, how can I really say it clearly, I guess, that disconnect is not something that is existent so much as it is just, it's breached by lies and just misunderstanding. Because the church wants to help out, but they don't know how, and then they find themselves
with, especially for, lifelong silver-haired church members who have grown up in the church, um, having that understanding of what goes on in the addict's life. There is that disconnect. They want to help, but then like you said, the problem is they don't know what to do or how to do it.
Well, and here's another thing is that I am my own worst critic, and I will judge myself in a very harsh manner.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't really do that so much anymore. But when I first came in, it was all about, well, I did this wrong. I'm such a piece of garbage, and like there was so much weight on my shoulders as far as guilt and shame and everything else that it was very hard for me to even want to reach out to anybody, let alone to church, because my thought process was they're just going to judge me too.
Right.
And that's a misconception that I think occurs a lot.
Yeah.
Because maybe because of some of the youth, like when I was young, I went to church and it was, you're a sinner, you're going to go to hell. And, it felt like it was a lot of judgment type stuff. And so for me, it was hard to understand that, that's not really what God is about, and that's not really what church is about, even though that process was put into my head, and so it kind of, it spins its wheels and then you add addiction on that, and then you add all the things that I've done wrong.
Right.
And you just keep adding to it. Well, it just made it very difficult and very, very hard for me to want to reach out to someone in the community that was in the church.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of times too is, I think sometimes with certain churches we and this can play into it for sure, but we have this idea of, especially some of the more deeply, it's a really fine line for churches to walk, because yes, he is sin and judgment and wrath, but I think sometimes we sugarcoat, or we don't, some churches, because he's equally gracious, loving, merciful, wanting no one to perish but all to have everlasting life. I mean, and so I think sometimes it's like the church can very easily fall on either side of that fence, and I think it makes it really difficult for those that have a history, because it is hard, because it does mean yes, we have to face our history. We can't just wash our hands and forget about it. We do have to face it.
Right.
And that's the hard part, because we don't want to face those things sometimes, which is what's important with the person going through recovery, is it forces your eyes to look at those things.
Yeah, it's called a fifth step.
Yeah, it is. There's an actual thing in there. So we see us having to look at those things, and so I think that's where, as far as addiction goes, those who are working in recovery are ahead of the game, because they're facing that stuff. But then the problem is like, how, before we get them to face there, we have to see the grace, we have to see the mercy, and to realize that he is there. I can be forgiven. I can be made new. Like, my addiction doesn't have to define me. My story and the things that I've done, they don't define me. I can become a new person, and seeing that wonderful new possibility.
Right.
And but that takes a recognition on the addict's part to say, I can't have that. Because again, going back to the addiction, the addiction says, no, you can't have that.
Okay, so they say that, I mean, it's in the big book, that we're physically, mentally, and spiritually
Yeah.
broken, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a truth to that. You know, you are. When I came into the program, I was completely broken, and not only was I completely broken, but my mind was so twisted that I didn't even see it. I couldn't understand why, you know. It's very hard to explain, but you know, I couldn't see it, and it took a long time for me to even think straight.
Right.
Because drugs, what they do is they go to your brain,
Right.
and so it kind of almost rewires your thought process and you know everything else. And so, in order for me to really start to see clearly, a little more clearly, it took time. My brain had to rewire itself again.
Well, and that's just it with the addictions, you
Right.
know, regardless whether it's drugs, alcohol, pornography, or whatever addiction
Right.
that there is there. That the way the addictive process works, and again, this is based upon my limited study on addictions, is that it does create shortcuts in the synapses of our brain. And so when you talk about rewiring the brain, it literally rewires
Right.
the brain. The best way to kind of like picture it in a visual sense is you're driving through town and half the town is under red cones because of construction, and
Right.
they retrain you how to drive basically. And so
And then when it's over, you have to relearn that.
you have to relearn.
The route. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. You know, and so for the part you were saying is like there's this little, you know, voice in your head. There's actually it really does happen. So as an addict, and I think in general most people, they play tapes in their head. Like you have these things that you continuously play. Well, being that I was in active addiction for 30, 40 years, those tapes were almost embedded into me.
Yeah.
And so in recovery, those tapes come up sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like, well, it's okay. You can, you know, you don't have to make this meeting, or you don't have to do this, you know, and it tries to weaken you in a way that's just that almost unnoticeable. You know, so you have to really be aware of the way you're thinking, you know, and feelings is a big thing, because when you're using, you don't feel
Right.
a lot. So when feelings start to come up, you don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And your thought, and immediately that little demon or that little addict in you starts to play this little tape about, well, you know, you don't have to feel this way. You could just
Self-medicate. Here you
right.
go.
You know, and it can be scary at times, because you start to wonder, especially in the beginning, you start to wonder if you're not freaking nuts.
Yeah.
You know, you're
Oh, yeah.
crazy.
Oh,
Because it's like, oh my God, why can't I get this right? You know, because you'll have points where you just feel really good and everything's great, and then all of a sudden, for no reason at all, you're questioning yourself, and you feel really, you know, upset about something, and it doesn't even have to be anything. It's just in general, and that, I think, has a lot to do with the whole. You have to relearn how to think. We have to relearn how to do life. Because as an addict, when I was in active addiction, my only goal was to get to that next high. You know, and I had no ambition. I had no concern about. I didn't care about other people. I didn't care, you know, about anything. I didn't even care about myself.
Where's my next thing that's going to
Right.
medicate?
Right. So you do that continuously for long periods of time, and you're stuck.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that some people think that, well, why can't you just stop? Well, at a certain point, it's no longer, you've given in.
Right.
I remember that there was a certain point where I was like, God, I really wish I could get help. I don't know how to do this. And but at the same time, that drug was nagging at me, like, well, just let's get high. We'll think about this kind of thing.
Right.
And then eventually, it just got to a point where it was just like, I just gave up.
Yeah.
And I just let it take over.
Yeah. It's easier to give in
Right.
to this nagging thought that just will not let me go, and just deal with the euphoria of what this brings me, as opposed to trying to push it off.
Well, and it's scary for somebody when they finally just give in, because suddenly you've given up all control.
Yeah.
You know, and you've lost any. I don't know how to put that. You've kind of lost any hope.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no hope anymore. There's no, you know, I can do better. There's none of that. It's just one focus, one main focus.
Yeah.
And when you're in that, it's so hard to see beyond that.
Yeah. Well, it's like your mind is on one. Your life gets stuck on one train. Right. There's no stops. There's no offshoots. This is the track. This is where you're going.
Right.
Just accept your fate and deal with it.
Right. And so my biggest thing is how can we as a community, and today I feel like I am part of the community. Mm-hmm. How can we snatch them off the train? How can we get them out of there? You know, before that train crashes, because that's ultimately what's going to happen. Yeah. Jails, institutions, and death. That's the results of addiction. Think about that. Jails, institutions, or death. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't seem okay to me.
No.
It's like, why should that be the result? You know, why should I have to go to jail? Obviously, if I do something wrong, I understand that there's consequences. Like, but it seems like an addict has to go so far that it has to be jail.
Yeah.
And why do we, you know, there has to be some kind of solution. And as an addict and being in recovery, you know, I understand that recovery, once you're in it, is a solution.
Right.
But how do we get that? How do we get the addict before he's crashing on a train? You know,
right.
Because there's too many deaths happening right now. It's ridiculous.
Right.
And people are being affected in so many ways because when you just give up and you stop caring, it no longer matters to you if you're taking from somebody else or if you're harming somebody else, or, you know, it just doesn't matter anymore.
Could a great way of getting the addicts, because that's what I'm hearing is, how can we get the addicts' attention?
Right.
You know, they're on that. We use that train analogy. They're riding on this train. So in my Western mindset, right, I picture these cowboys riding on their horses, riding by this train, as the addict on the train is stuck in their chair like this,
right,
just going through, you know, and just going through it, as the hero is riding on the horse, trying to get the person. So how can we get the addict's attention? And I think that's the biggest part, is how can we get their attention. I was thinking when you were talking, I was thinking about you know, just the impact that that Christ can have in that role if the church gets its act together. There's a scene in the book of Acts where two of the disciples were walking into the temple, and there was a lame man. Obviously, that's you know, how can you get lame man and addict? We can compare that however we want. But there's that scene where they're walking in, and there's the lame man at the gate, and he's begging for alms. He's lame. He can't walk. He has no strength in his legs. And it says that they walk in, and that it says that Peter and John set their eyes upon this man, and you know, so they noticed him. They noticed this guy who's sitting there, and he says, "Hey, look, this is where I'm at. This is what I need. Can you give me some coin?" And I love that the disciples' responses. They said, silver and gold we don't have, but what we do have, it's yours. And then they say, in the name of Jesus Christ, stand up and walk. And they grab the man's hand, and they don't even wait. They just grab this man's hand and they pull him to his feet.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like that's the place where the church needs to come up to and arrive at, where we see the addicts. We're not repelled by them; we see them.
See, and I think that, okay, so I agree with you, and before I get into that part of it, I think that when you finally lose that spiritual part of yourself, that's when the lights shut off,
right,
for an addict. So that's why I reached out to a church, because I thought, maybe if we could just, maybe even flicker the light,
right,
it might give them a chance. But so back to the other part, which I forgot for a second here.
That's okay.
Yeah. So that would be, like you said, the disciples, they see him, and I feel like everybody knows, but nobody really wants to talk about it. Nobody really, they see it, but they don't want to see it.
Right.
Like there's this whole idea of, well, maybe if I don't really look at it, it's not really happening.
Right.
Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. It's happening.
Yeah.
And we can't just keep closing our eyes or putting a Band-Aid on it, or
well,
there has to be more involvement.
Well, and that's so back to that story in Acts. The lame man was there at the gate there because he knew that place worked.
Right.
People were giving him that Band-Aid. Hey, do you have coin? Do you have coin? And people would be like, yeah, here you go, quiet. Or they would ignore him, or they would throw a coin his way, which that doesn't resolve what he really needs. What he needs is healing. So they just keep on allowing him to remain in that place, and they do nothing about it.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. Is that they saw what he really needed.
Right.
And they were open, because we can't. One of the worst things you can do in addiction and for addicts is continue to allow things to happen in the dark.
Right.
This needs to come out in the light. We need to shine light on it. We need to stop keeping secrets. And and you may not even realize. People don't even realize that they're keeping a secret, because they're like, well, I don't want to put him out there.
Right.
I don't want to expose him. Well, guess what? You're not doing any favors.
Right.
And like you were talking, they came and they didn't, they weren't like, they didn't come at him in a judgment.
No.
They're just like, we see you.
Yeah.
This is what you really need, which is Christ.
Yeah.
Because he can do what you need.
Yeah.
So.
And they were like, hey, here, let me give you what I've got. Like,
right.
it wasn't just like, yes, this is my faith. You need to have your
right.
own faith. No, it's like, let me give you what I've already got. Let me
right.
let me give you freedom. Let me give you peace. Let me give you strength. Let me give you that spiritual connection
right.
that you've been looking for, that you've been needing. You may not even realize that you need it.
Most times you don't.
Yeah,
Most times you don't realize.
Well, and here's the other part of that story is, after this man is healed, and it creates a ruckus, and the two disciples end up getting in trouble with their leaders, and I think what's really beautiful is they saw this guy's need, and what he really needed, and were willing to do something about it, regardless of what they were going to have to endure themselves. And I think sometimes as a church, like, that's where maybe the church's part needs to kick in, is we have this answer, we have this grace and this mercy that we've been given, and that our job is really to get
maybe our self-preservation off the line,
Extend it.
and just extend that to that other person, and I think it would be really good.
Right.
For the sake of time, do you want to keep talking, or would you like to just kind of cap it off here?
Well, we can. I would like to say a couple other things.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
So when you are at a place where you feel like you cannot be helped, and someone out of and someone out of nowhere touches you,
yeah,
that is a moment for an addict. Whether they acknowledge it or not, that's a moment, because suddenly they realize, okay, maybe somebody can care about me. Maybe somebody can love me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not so bad.
Yeah.
You know. And on the other side of that, the person doing that, you know, it's not that you can't see the addict, or you can't see the person that they are as that addict, but it's that you can see a perspective from a spiritual side,
yeah,
and be able to extend that out to someone who absolutely needs it.
Well,
There's no doubt that they need it.
For the believer,
Right.
to extend, what's happening is they may not, sometimes it might be realized, it might not be. They're recognizing somebody, they're seeing somebody through the eyes of God. They're seeing, I see you.
Right.
And it's through, and you're seeing that person the way God does. And then, like you said, the addict is like, hey, I'm seen.
Right.
I'm valuable.
That's a powerful
I'm
thing.
worth it.
Yes, and it's a very powerful thing for an addict. You know, there are moments, you know, where God can get through.
Right.
But if you don't even try, how can you, you know? I think that one of the most disappointing things for me in my addiction was that the people who continuously said they loved me and were worried about me never really, they wanted to keep it a secret. They didn't want other people to know. They wanted to hide this whole idea.
Yeah.
And it did me no favors.
No, well, you're keeping it under that veil.
Right.
You're keeping that covered up, and that just allows it's like having cancer, but deciding that you're not going to deal with it.
Right. And
you're sick. Okay.
so as an addict get in recovery,
Yeah.
they tell you to get out of your own way sometimes, because I can ruin things pretty quickly, you know. So sometimes I have to get out of my own way.
Yeah.
And I think on the other side of that would be kind of a similar thing is that sometimes you have to get out of your own way. And I'm not saying that you're wrong or that there's, you know, you're this problem or anything. What I'm saying is that sometimes you just have to stop the way you think and just allow God to work through you.
Yeah.
Because if you let that happen, God will do the miracle.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what it really comes down to. Because every addict that gets clean or gets sober or stops with whatever their addiction is, it's a miracle.
Oh yeah.
You know, Serena got a tattoo that says 2%.
Yeah.
Because only 2% of addicts will die clean and sober.
Wow.
That's a mess. That to me is not acceptable.
No.
So you're saying 98% of us, we're going to die.
Yeah.
And we're going to die in full addiction. And probably because of addiction.
Right.
You know what I mean? That doesn't seem right.
What can grace do to take the 2% of our community and say that's not enough? What can we do? What can we do with grace? And say let's aim for the sky and turn that 2% into 98, 99. I mean, what can we do? And for those who are in the midst of recovery, who are recovery clean, you guys have such a testimony and such a wonderful story that gives you a larger repertoire, a larger tool bag to reach people who need that.
which is why I love this discussion, because it's like, hey, you got the tools, and we're coming together, and like, how can we make this happen? Because you guys you get to take your stories and you get to show people through your life this is possible. Because I think sometimes the attic is the lie is it's not. We have a man in our church who he a couple years ago was diagnosed diabetic, and just a couple months ago he went and saw his doctor, and they were talking about it, and the doctor says, okay, I'm done. I don't need to see you anymore. I don't want to see you anymore. You're not diabetic anymore.
Right.
It's like sometimes I think we can get these perspectives that this is my life sentence.
Right.
When no, it's not. It is possible to defeat these things.
Well, anything in God is possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't have a solution.
Right.
I don't claim to have a solution.
Right.
I only know what worked for me, and for me, I had to go through jails, institutions, and I look back and I think, why did it have to be like that?
Right.
Well, what can my whole thing is what can we do differently as a community to shine light on this and just and my hope is that it'll get people thinking, and the conversation can start, and then somewhere God's gonna put his imprint on it, and he's gonna say, this is how you can help. And that's my hope. I don't assume that I have any answers, because I really don't, and I do live in recovery, and I've lived in recovery for over 5 years, and I know what works for me.
Right.
But I really feel like that everybody needs to understand what addiction really is.
Right.
Because it's a complete loss of control. It's you lose yourself.
Right.
You are no longer the person you were. And I think a lot of people can look in the eyes of an active addict,
right,
and be like, it's blank.
Right.
It really is
see
blank.
that void expression.
Yeah, it's just blank. And that's because they're lost.
Yeah.
So how do we find them?
Right.
How do we find them? Like that would be my goal. Obviously the goal would be we would never have addiction again.
Right.
But I mean, that would be great, but let's start somewhere.
I would say, as far as like to make things practical, to issue that first challenge,
right,
to basically say step one, if we're to give anybody who's listening to this, what is something practical I can take away right now, is quite simply see them. Notice them, and it's essentially, that, because that was, and that, that in that the account in the book of Acts, that was the very first thing. That the guy was already self-existent. He was already there. He was in the midst of his issues, and what the disciples do, they saw him first.
Right.
And I think
stop with the secrets.
Yeah, stop with it.
Shine light on it.
Just and step one, just let them know. And that's the thing. Like, we can see them. Like, oh yeah, right, no, I saw this person, and they were at Walmart, or I saw that. No, don't just see them.
Right.
Let them know they've been seen.
Right.
And do it in a way that's gracious.
Yeah.
And
not like, you're an addict. That's not probably gonna work.
That's the worst thing to do.
But we understand. And
yeah.
So I also think that an addict is generally in denial,
right,
about their own addiction. But they're not the only ones. The people around them have a tendency to be in denial. The people who care about those people have a tendency to be in denial. Let's stop.
Right.
Let's just stop that. It's just a lie that we tell ourselves to make things better. Well, guess what? It doesn't make anything better.
Right.
As a matter of fact, all it does is it coddles that addict and lets them continue to do the garbage that they're doing.
Yeah.
So the addict might be in denial, but I think the rest of us need to get out of that. Well, we need to get out of denial.
I think it's like, especially people who are closely related to an individual in denial, right, I think what happens is we can be, in my family, we call it the good old boy syndrome. Little Johnny will never go and do that. He's a good boy. Right. That's a denial.
At least
statement.
He's not shooting it up. At
right.
least they're not doing this. At least they're not doing that. Well, guess what? that day is coming.
Yeah.
If you don't get to a point where you find, because I personally I've been on both sides. There are other people in my family who have addiction, and I was in complete denial, partly because I was in addiction myself. But it was hard to see that because it was like, no, not them, and that's just not how it works,
right?
So I think that the biggest thing that we should be able to take away from this is that you're right. We need to see the addict. B, we need to stop with this whole lie in our head, because that's what it is. It's a lie.
Yeah.
We need to shine light on this, and the only way to do that is to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And probably many more.
Yeah. Oh no, it'll need to be more. I mean, because this is. I mean, we've been sitting here for nearly an hour already.
Right.
And
we haven't even touched the surface.
We're still there, and I think that this is probably a great place to kind of take a little break. And so
I agree.
We'll release this. I'm gonna make a little thumbnail, make it look nice to put it out there. But this is just the first of many conversations, and because we want to peel back more.
Right.
We want to go deeper, and I think allowing that to happen. So.
Well, and I think that another thing by you putting it out. Is that I would like to know what other people are thinking. Like, what kind of questions do they have? Like honestly, if somebody has a question of an addict, ask it. Yeah. Ask me now, because I will tell you exactly what my history, or why this happened for me, or what I think about it, or whatever, and just maybe we can open that up so that you can ask the addict in your life, or maybe you can figure something out, because that's what the goal is.
Yeah.
I'm tired of seeing the paper full of freaking deaths.
Yeah.
I'm tired of seeing people hurt in my life because of something some addict did. I'm tired of seeing the community feeling like they always have to protect themselves from whatever it is. So just ask the question, and I will be honest.
Yeah, we're not experts, but we have a story and a testimony that is unique to us, but familiar to many others, and we would like to be a resource as well. So. Jabbar, thanks for this discussion, man, and on to the next one. So, thank you so much.